Hello everyone, I'm Annie Gibbins and you're listening to Memoirs of Successful Women, the podcast where you get to hear candid conversations with fascinating women from around the globe who share aspects of their business and life journey, how they measure their success and what they have learnt along the way. Well, hello and welcome everyone to Memoirs of Successful Women. Today I have the beautiful Babita Spinelli, who was a Wall Street executive and lawyer and now is an award-winning psychotherapist, mental health consultant, certified coach. She has done it all. You'll see her as a frequent media contributor and podcast speaker about relationships, narcissism, workplace mental health, divorce, and much more. She is known as a relationship expert, and you'll often see her in Huffington Post, Insider, Mind Body Green, Medium, Bloomberg. She's just been in Forbes and Authority magazine. She is everywhere. Men's Health, Washington Post, it goes on. So welcome to the program, Babita.
Oh, thank you so much, Annie.
It's lovely to have you here. And I'd love to start the journey by you sharing about why you became a psychotherapist. Why does a lawyer become a psychotherapist?
Yes, why? Good question, right? I was pretty successful in the law, and I also went into corporate America. And during my journey, I realized that there were lots of wonderful things that I liked about practicing and about working on Wall Street. But I realized that I didn't feel like I was doing something as meaningful as I would want to do, and that there was something else that was my calling. And so in that journey, I ended up seeing a psychotherapist. And through my exploration with her, we started to dive into what were the things that would fulfill me. And one day she handed me a bunch of books like Adler and Freud and Margaret Mahler. And she said, I think you'd make a great therapist. You should read these.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of where I am today.
So the therapist told you would make a great therapist, probably due to your mind and probably your heartfelt desire to make a difference, which obviously wasn't being fulfilled even as a corporate lawyer. So when you were, it's an honor really to be told that by someone and very clear to you. So that started your journey. So let's stay in the law for a little bit then. So when you were a lawyer and you were in Wall Street, you're a top corporate lawyer in America. What sort of cases, when you were working there, and you'd obviously done a lot of work, university, career development to get to that state, day in, day out, how did you, what were the rewards of that and what were the key frustrations, just so that the listeners can hear the conflict that was happening within you?
Sure. So I started in the more traditional legal path, but then I ended up going into a particular field called corporate compliance. And in that arena, I sort of wore the hat of an executive using my legal skills. The gems that I really liked about it is I loved being able to get stakeholder buy-in, build relationships, develop policy, be able to present and influence other employees and individuals to really work with integrity and follow the law that was applicable to the industry. And so those were the pieces that I really enjoyed and loved. I loved taking something and seeing the transformation happen. So when you put out a policy or you're working on a particular huge project around compliance issues in a company, you're really trying to get people to understand it and apply it, even own it, and realize it can make a difference in the corporation. And so I loved to see that transformation happen. So those were the gems. Some of the struggles where I found myself sort of wanting a little bit more of that, meaning the parts that I loved about the work were about those relationships with individuals and the part around seeing results, seeing how things could change. within a particular organization. And I love the interaction with people. And I loved doing that. That gave me a real feeling of satisfaction. The other parts, though, that were challenges were the actual work itself. I found that the topics itself started to not interest me anymore. I also found, and I sort of speak to this with a lot of executives that I work with and leaders of companies, where oftentimes there may not be enough empathy or understanding that might come from leadership. And I think now that's changing with regard to emotional intelligence. But there can be a lot of rigidity and a lot of expectation of what you are supposed to do and who you are supposed to be. I really feel that that's developing now differently. But at the time that I was in that space, though, there were a lot of barriers there. And so I really realized that I wanted to sort of be my own boss, so to speak, but also do a lot of meaningful work to see how can I actually help in that space, give a little insight around that because I've been there.
Yeah.
And then continue to help people in all sorts of ways with regard to their own conflict or challenges and struggles.
Amazing, amazing. So then you made the very big decision to become a psychotherapist. So how did you do that? That's obviously more years of education and training. And did you combine that with part-time law, or did you actually say, no, I need to have a full break and immerse myself in my whole new career?
I actually did do it in chunks. And I often, encourage that for other people. I think sometimes people think when there's a career jump, there's a lot of fears because they think they have to like take the magic pill and just take the leap, kind of jump off the bridge and do it. But I did it in chunks. So going back in time, just to say that I actually loved law school. I really did. I love education. I love academia. Really just find it an amazing space to learn and thrive. And so I was looking forward to actually going back to school. And so it took me about 5 years. I was very fortunate because I could use a lot of what I had in my Juris Doctorate to translate into the space of being, a psychotherapist.
Oh, okay.
And so it was I had my academic part, and then I had to do all of my clinical part and my supervision and everything. So in totality, it was about 5 years. And I did it in chunks. And so at one point, I did hold both spaces. At one point, I had my practice and I was doing my corporate work. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. You could do that in New York City,
Quite a unique juggle that I'm sure not many people relate to that kind of juggle.
It was very interesting. And then eventually it just really transitioned full time.
Okay. So what did you learn most about yourself while becoming a psychotherapist?
Well, I learned a few things. I learned as much as we try and push away our roots and our family histories and things that have impacted us, that they do, but we can learn from it. So I really, worked psychoanalytically with my therapist in terms of really knowing myself and understanding some of the patterns that I had learned through my childhood in time that I had absorbed, really working through that, even working through some traumas. I also recognize that, that life can be messy and everything is not so perfect, wrapped up in, this bow, and that's okay. And so I really, took those tenements. I also realized there's ways to see things in all sorts of different ways. And perhaps that's also where the legal, you're always thinking of, from a different angle, but that there's lots of perspectives. And really for us to realize that there are gray spaces and to be open to that for myself, which then translates into the work I do with individuals. I realize that we are ever evolving. We're always learning, we're always changing, and that's okay. And we embrace that. And so I learned that in my journey, and I impart that in the work that I do.
Beautiful, because I'm imagining it's just such a journey of self-discovery. It's the type of qualification that you must just, have to reflect so much on yourself while doing that qualification, as opposed to law, which is, very clinical and systematic. And yes, you do have to be thinking in a broad ranges of perspectives and then seeing how you can work around that. Whereas it is such a contrast to be able to do a qualification that is all about the person, but then you've got the breadth of people on how they see things, how they perceive things, what lens they do so, what their traumas and struggles have been, the whole reality of mindset and our thought patterns is just so fascinating, but so complex.
It really, really is. And I think one of the things in my clinical training as a psychoanalyst is we are required to do 3 times a week psychoanalysis. And there's so much beauty in that because you really are forced to truly look very deep inside yourself. And what that brings is, if you can't do that, how do you expect, your patients, your clients to be vulnerable, to be able to feel like they can look at that in a safe way? So I do feel that there's so much self-discovery, and I really feel so grateful to do what I do, but to also go through that process myself personally. It's made a huge difference in my life.
Do you feel much calmer as a psychotherapy? Are you now just you're feeling pretty calm and confident most of the time? Does that come out through the experience that you've had?
Yes, I do think that it's come out through the journey.
Mm, mm.
Wasn't always like this, which is what
Yeah.
I tell my clients. We kind of go through some messy things. But yes, I feel through the journey, I've really sort of become more grounded, feel more calmer, and sort of realize that, things are figure outable.
Absolutely. Everything is figure outable. It just takes some time, sometimes, and takes bravery to step in and try and give yourself permission and time to be able to do that. I'd love to chat to you because I interview a lot of coaches, and as a psychotherapist, if you'd be able to tell the difference to our listeners, well, if you're making a decision to see, a coach or a certified coach or a psychotherapist, psychologist, what is the difference? What do you bring to the table as a psychotherapist, which is different to, mentors and coaches?
Great question, because I sort of have the Babita Spinelli coaching, part
Yes.
of my practice, and then I have the psychotherapy. And so, I would say this. I think with psychotherapy, there's a lot that we're trained in and we learn on the psychology of the mind, behavior, theory, really deeply understanding things such as object relations theory, Freudian classical theory that we can apply in our work. We also can truly work in the space of anxiety, depression, grief, and other sort of disorders, which can actually be really helpful because we can sort of dive deep in with our clinical understanding of something, but still get to a transformational space. I think a lot of times people think if you go to a therapist, it really is all about, I understand what you're feeling and that's about it. And that's not it at all.
Yeah.
It really, you really do go into some deeper spaces so people can like not just band-aid what they're doing, but understand their deeper patterns, but also see where it comes from and see what happens with regard to what I call transference. Like, where do we project those things in our relationships or to other people? And so that part is very much part of the psychodynamic, psychotherapy journey. With coaching, and it's interesting you asked me this because I did a presentation to a coaching group called How to Apply Psychological Tools to Coaching. So I
Yes.
do think, right, that coaches can sort of glean from that and take that and apply it. Perhaps with coaching, an individual has already done that work, meaning they may have worked through some of those deeper issues or patterns. they're more grounded. Maybe there is, of course, everyone has some form of anxiety, but they've sort of learned how to manage it. A lot of the coping tools have been already worked through, navigated, and are being utilized. And so now they're really ready to sort of take in and dive in and take very specific action steps,
Yes.
and hold themselves accountable. And they feel that they're absolutely spot on ready for that. And I'm not saying that individuals don't come into therapy without wanting the same things. So I have many clients that are in therapy that still also want the action steps and the accountability, right? That's that positive psychology application. But when you go right into coaching, you've sort of gone through maybe the darker cobwebs, I would say.
Yeah.
And if you haven't, then you're sort of like, maybe I need to work through those.
Yes. And I asked you that question because, as I'm a business and life coach, and I'm exactly that. Some people haven't done that work. And when I start coaching them, I'll go, we'll unpack a few things and I'll say, you would benefit from going to get an expert, psychotherapist, psychologist to work on those issues, because it's a deeper emotional process. Whereas, and then there's the other people who are ready and then go, can you, because I'm all about actions, results, achievements, well, what do you need to do? And there's systems and processes of that, and tips and tricks and so forth, to become more effective and efficient and those sorts of things. And I noticed that about your practice, that you have, psychotherapy and coaching, because you've got your own coaching practice. So I thought you've obviously got both sides of that happening, which is just a beautiful package to be able to go, okay, if you're ready for the actual coaching tips, here we go, or if you're wanting to go deeper, you can have the psychotherapy as well. So, and I haven't seen that. I've seen, a million coaches, and then I've seen clinicians, if you like, but I haven't seen it sort of presented that way. So I think that's great for listeners to know that is out there, and that they are quite different. They are very different. Yeah,
I really love it, because I find, when someone comes to me for therapy, and let's say they want to even do eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a modality I use to process certain traumas. And so let's say we've done that work and they've transitioned out. And then let's say they want to, they're having some difficulties in their career and they really want to transition or find a different career. And then they'll say, I really want to do some coaching with you. So they've done the therapy. And so then I can, kind of say, okay, let's now look at this and sort of drive some results here, and let's look at that in a different way. And as you said, using particular systems, et cetera. So I love both branches, and, that's why, but I do sort of keep them separately.
Yes.
And not try and muddle them, because I think that often can be a little confusing, and that they are two very separate, ways of operating.
Yes. And I see them as very separate ways of operating. And I can imagine it would be very, very difficult to try and interrelate them. I noticed on your bio, so you've obviously got a great passion for relationships, and your passion to, work on relationships with people, and also in companies and corporate aspects. And you've also got down there narcissistic, sort of narcissism. How do you work with people on narcissistic behavior? And for those who aren't aware of, how does that present? Or, can you explain what that means to our listeners?
Sure. So yes, part of one of my niche areas really is about relationships, and relationships to yourself, relationships in the workplace, relationships with your romantic partners. And that really, when we are able to really look very deeply at our relationships and take a look at what's healthy or not healthy, that really helps us, right, to thrive and be more fulfilled in our life and make better choices. So with narcissism, I tend to work in the space where someone is either in a relationship with a narcissist, or they've been in a relationship with a narcissist. So it tends to be not with the narcissist themselves, but actually someone who's really suffering from the behavior of a narcissist.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that I haven't sort of previously, early on in my clinical training, had individuals come in and I've started to have that light bulb moment that I really feel like this person is, you know, a narcissist. Um, and so really narcissistic personality disorder kind of runs on a spectrum.
Yeah.
So you could just have symptoms of narcissism, such as, you know, grandiose behavior, a sense of, you know, control, wanting to have, you know, power over someone. And then it moves up to real narcissistic abuser, where several things happen. One, it starts off as being someone who's extremely maybe charming. So they kind of reel the person in, but really goes back into that wanting to dominate or control them. There's a lot of emotional manipulation in the space. The individual starts to become very fearful. They don't feel like they can make decisions. The person starts to become more isolated. The narcissist likes to keep that person, you know, close to themselves, and that person starts to like move away from their friendships. The narcissist comes from a very wounded place, and so there's a very high sensitivity to anything that the narcissist would think is an injury. So you really are tiptoeing. Anyone in a relationship with a narcissist is walking on eggshells. They feel they can't say or do anything right unless they are idealizing the narcissist. And there's also what we call a lot of gaslighting. If you did this, that would mean you love me.
Yeah.
Because you did this, you're very selfish, that clearly you don't care. So we have this huge spectrum of things around narcissism and being in a narcissistic relationship. And the list is quite long. So I'm just giving
I know
you
it's a
a
complex
few
topic too.
snippets.
To raise with you. I've just found that, you know, I've been around a few people who sort of say, oh, well, I'm in a relationship with a narcissist. And I'm thinking, well, you're the relationship expert. I thought I'll use that as an expert. And my personal query was, you know, if the narcissist doesn't come for the coaching or the therapy and it's the person suffering, does it ever work out well? Do you know what I mean? Like, so that you can help the person, you know, is there a response that the response is always to therefore move away from that person? It doesn't help the narcissist, but it helps the person. So you're obviously there. That's going to be your client. As you've said, most of the people coming are struggling in that relationship, you know, whether it's a personal relationship or if it's in a work environment. You know, is it ever going to work out well is probably my thought of, or is it helping them to make that proactive decision saying this is not healthy for you. You need to.
Usually it's this isn't healthy for you, and it's how do we navigate that? But it becomes difficult if someone is a parent and there's children involved. Oftentimes people will come to me because they have they themselves have a narcissistic parent, a narcissistic mother, a narcissistic father. People also come to me because they have a narcissistic boss. And I don't know if you saw that video out there. That one, you know, they're not going to just leave their job. So in that one, we really work on how do you manage that situation. And similarly, if someone doesn't feel they can leave their relationship, the way I work with them is sometimes they do bring in their partner, and their partner may not own it, but we do a lot of couples work to manage communication and coping mechanisms, and to at least provide some barometer around what's healthy or not. And also to help the individual who's the non-narcissist to realize how much they can actually push, that they're actually not dealing with a normal set of circumstances. And so I work with them to realize if you're going to stay in this, this is what you need to do. And really kind of, we work on that consistently.
I think that's a brilliant word, normalizing, right? That's it. When you're in these relationships with different people, you start to think, well, that's just the way it is, or that's the way it has to be. And you sort of can easily normalize that situation. Whereas when you suddenly go to a therapist and you realize that's not normal behavior, you shouldn't be accepting certain behaviors. It's not healthy for you. I think that in itself is the biggest reality learning for many people, because they've grown to think, well, it is just my reality. It is a normal behavior. Other people must have to put up with this as well, right?
Annie, that is so true. And I can't begin to tell you the number of clients who've had light bulb moments by hearing me say exactly what you just said. Like, Did you realize that that's not normal behavior? Did you realize that you might be with a narcissist? Let me educate you on what that means. And it's like the light bulb goes off, and then they can even tie it back to maybe they have a narcissistic parent and they say, you know what, that sounds just like my father, just like my mother. No wonder I thought that this was normal. And so we start to talk about, well, what does that really look like? What is healthy? And we go into what are boundaries, what are healthy boundaries, because a narcissist bleeds boundaries. So they have no idea what a boundary is. They start to forget where their feelings are. Where do my feelings begin and end? Where do his or her feelings begin or end? So you are so spot on that just by having that witnessed and expressed by a therapist who specializes in that is huge.
It certainly, it is huge. And that's why I shared it. You know, for me personally, you know, I do have a narcissistic mother, and I've been through many, many years, and it took me to the age of 50 to appreciate that, yeah, that, you know, the behavior wasn't normal. It's not okay if it just because it comes from a mother or someone you love or that you think you have to respect and be different for. So it took me that conversation with a psychologist to actually go, you realize it's not normal and it's not okay. And your acceptance of it, you know, actually allows it to continue. It will continue because she won't change, you know, so you're going to have to put up these boundaries for yourself because it's obviously not very healthy. So I'm very happy to self-share that. It's a huge moment when you're trying to do things because one, as in often respectful, you know, whether it's a parent or a you know, a boss of, okay, well, I have to respect the authority or the position that you're in, or you actually say, because of the relationship you've had, it must be me. I must have done something wrong. I'm going to have to work better on that, you know, and you take it on board because of the way that they have related to you. And so I know it's such a complex issue and one that we obviously can't unpack on a podcast, but it's, you know, if people out there are struggling in these sorts of ways and starting to think, yeah, I wonder if it's not normal. That's right. It isn't normal in many aspects. You as a relationship expert, there'd be so many aspects of relationships that people think are normal and they're not, because we only have a very small lens, don't we, of, you know, how many relationships have we been in, particularly those intimate ones, and what you know, particularly those young women who get into a relationship and you think, well, this must be what relationships are like, right? You know, I'm looking at that with my young daughters now in their early 20s, and you're thinking, well, you know, it's not as if you would know, you know, sometimes what a healthy relationship is like, and then what decisions you'll make in that, because you want to be in the relationship in the good parts. Like everything, you get great parts and then you get challenging parts.
It's so true. And you know, I think that oftentimes when there's that aha moment happens, when people start to understand really what is healthy, what is not healthy, they can start to really apply it with intention and then be able to guide their own children, you know, who are, you know, teens and then, you know, young adults, young men or women around it. Because one of the things that happens is we definitely repeat what we don't repair, and we just keep having these sort of very similar relationship patterns. But it also impacts our self-worth, you know, our self-esteem. And so when one continues to be in relationships that aren't quite so healthy, and we either lose one's identity or lose yourself, or you don't really know, like, wow, this really isn't something that I should be, you know, agreeing to, etc., you start to not recognize your own self-worth, and you don't realize how much that's impacted. And so a lot of work that we do tend to look at how to rebuild one's own self-esteem and identity again, and then lean into these relationships, whether it's at work or personal relationships, with a lot more confidence, and a lot more internal resilience and more of your own internal sense of self-worth and value.
which is core to everything, who you are and what you then are able to then do and achieve and be successful in. Because that's right, if you haven't got to that grassroots of, that's right, who am I, and what, how do I respond, and what influences me, and what distresses me, and what excites me, and all those sorts of aspects, then how do you then sort of grow into your best self in the environment that you're working in? Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
What do you think, I'll ask you, what do you think our education system can do better to equip people? We obviously we're very academically focused, but we have generations of people who struggle with emotional intelligence and relationships, and is it something that's gone wrong? Is it actually supposed to be with the families to raise, to equip people? From your perspective, do you think we have imbalances in certain areas that should have been actioned to equip people better for their relationships and to be able to grow themselves in a healthy way?
I love that you asked me this question because, working with families, parents, and even, teachers, what I think we could do better is a much more holistic approach in our education system. There seems to be a lot of silos. And what I mean by that is you might have a counselor, and then you'll have a teacher, and then you'll have things going on in the family. And I'm not sure how much we're investing in ensuring that those three meet.
Yes.
And that we're in a space where there is communication and education and learning and understanding in those three components. From my lens, often it can be very siloed. So you would have like an incredible teacher who's noticing things that are coming up with her students, and maybe a counselor then that brings the parents in to talk about it. But then at some point, what happens with the teacher? And so what I've been hearing a lot of, and then I think we could do a lot more of, is to think a little bit more about how do we get the components to work more, to be more integrated in how they work together, because I think that could really help. So that's one piece. I also think that we could have much more around life skills education early on in school, as early on as possible. So, sometimes you'll get to college and then you have your electives, or maybe there's some high schools that, might have that. But if we can bring that on very early on about how do we behave towards each other, even courses around like Kristen Neff's self-compassion, Brene Brown, being vulnerable, working on empathy, more things around, emotional IQ. And we could do it at a level for the age group, right? We can apply it in a certain way. We can create modules in a certain way and have that more prevalent in the system, more early on. I feel it could be more impactful. And then we get it from the start of a particular child's education. And then the third part, you could see I have a lot to say about this, is I think that I really think that I think a lot of parents are doing this, and this is what I love about what's happening right now. I think mental health is coming up more to the forefront. People are being more aware. I think parents are becoming more interested in understanding how important it is to parent in a healthy way. And then they're doing that earlier on. If we can continue to advocate for that and provide more resources for that and encourage that, then of course it's going to trickle to right, the family system.
Yes, that's right.
And that helps the education process.
Yeah. I love, I knew you'd have a bit to say on that. And I think that is wonderful. And it's hard in reality, because I know if you asked a teacher, they'd be saying, oh my gosh, there's not one more thing we could jam into the curriculum because now we have to do, we have to raise this child. We have to do everything, and it gets really overwhelming. And then from the family perspective, that's right. You'll get such a breadth of families, and, from the super amazing, haven't had much trauma and are totally behind that young person 100%. And then you'll get others who have really tragic situations and are relying on the education system by default to hopefully, raise a healthy young adult for the future. And so it is obviously a complex situation, but from my experience, and definitely I've had 5 children go through the education system, I've noted that there's got to be more effort put into the emotional well-being, but actually just life skills, making more choices, being proactive in decision making. That when you do a rote learn sort of situation of school and you just go to subjects and achieve, you do the formula and achieve, but you don't look at it from the perspective of, that's right, I think you mentioned electives, well, what would I like to do, what interests me, what doesn't interest me, or choosing becoming more empowered to realize that there are, obviously, as you get older, you will be making these decisions. You'll be making decisions about what to choose for a career. Does it actually suit you? Almost like, it's interesting when if I use career as an example, often when you then suddenly go for your first 1 or 2 interviews, and then suddenly they'll do a psych profile test on you to see if you're appropriate for that position. You kind of go, well, that would have been good to know in school. Do they do tests like that before you make those massive decisions of what degree to go into?
Yes. Oh, it's so true.
That
So
would
true.
be amazing.
Yes, and you're so right. I mean, I think everybody is so saturated, right? Everyone has so much in their roles, as you're saying, with teachers. There's so much that they have on their plate. Administrators have so much on their plate. Counselors too. So I agree with you that if there's some way that we think creatively, and I know some schools are trying to incorporate that, and there've been organizations where they've brought me in to just consult, and then they've tried to bring things in. So I also like what you said, and I think you and I are sort of speaking the same language, that maybe some life skills that maybe even focus on, you have choices, self-esteem, self-building, life skills, things of that nature can be really helpful.
So let's move forward now to the business that you've got. You've got, Babita Spinelli coaching, your psychotherapy, your coaching, you're writing in magazines. What are the key needs for people at this time? What do your clients, is there a theme of what they mainly come to you for, or are there, or is it just still a bit random?
Mm-hmm. There is specific things I think that a lot of clients tend to come to me for, and they fall in a few buckets. I'd say the first bucket is a lot of the relationship work with romantic partners. So I see a lot of couples coming to me. And yes, of course, there's the communication and intimacy piece, but a lot of high conflict pieces. So infidelity, toxic relationships, things around, maybe they've been sort of experiencing the same negative behaviors or patterns for many, many, many years, and they might be thinking that they're going to, get divorced. And so this is sort of their last, way of saying, can we save the marriage? And so that's one bucket. A lot of that has been coming up, in the pandemic right now, where people are really struggling in their relationships and spending all that time together. It's not that those issues didn't exist, it's that the external stimuli is no longer there. So they're actually now turning to look and do some couples coaching or couples therapy. So that's one bucket. I'd say the other bucket is when there are big life transitions. I have a lot of individuals around divorce. So I have a post-divorce program around building after divorce, and not just surviving. It's the cliche word, but really thriving.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? So we have a lot of clients in that space. And I have a lot of clients in the space who are their professionals or their executives. And they're really trying to figure out how to balance their life and the high demands of their career. These are high performers. And they really, they're leaders in their field. they're either CEOs, CFOs, COOs, MDs. Some of them are in the financial services industry, or they're lawyers, and they tend to be parents. And so, and then they have their relationships, and they're really trying to figure out, like, how do I balance it all, and how do I end up still doing what I do in a successful way, but also have a healthy life, and what does that look like? So
Yes.
that's a whole other area. And so, sort of what I described, I would say, is like the kinds of individuals that come to me. And then we just have that whole other piece around organizations that might come to me to say, can you do a talk about this? Can you work with a department on burnout? Can you speak to this? But
Sure.
that's the majority of sort of that one-on-one work that I do.
Oh, fascinating, fascinating. I'm imagining because of COVID, that's it, where people have come back into the home. That's a pressure cooker, isn't it, for relationship stress? And so often many relationships work because they actually don't see each other that much, right? And so,
Yes.
the fact that you do work long hours or whatever, so when there's issues of conflict, they'll surface, but suddenly, oh well, we can't talk about that, I've got to go off to work or wherever. And so these families which have now, one, got the couple together, but then now you're also, when we had lockdown, we had, homeschooling as well. So you've got a couple of kids, needing attention too. It's just a recipe for stress, and highlighting the issues that you already would have had. So I'm imagining you've been very busy during this pandemic in
I
a
have been
very
very busy.
unfortunate way, but then maybe in some ways, obviously if there's domestic violence sort of projecting from that stress, that's obviously very, very sad and unfortunate. But if it's actually putting the pressure that is surfacing the problems to then result in now suddenly seeing a therapist, that's a very good thing. That's a proactive thing, that those things could have gone on for years and years and years and tolerated as normal. And now it's like, okay, it's actually not, because if we can't be together in a home 24/7 without wanting to kill each other, maybe we should actually get some therapy around that.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely, absolutely. I think, usually there are band-aids or ways that people haven't really been looking at it. And so actually the silver lining is it's really forced people to look at things in ways they haven't before, to
Yeah.
look at what really fulfills me. And there's, I call it the pandemic under the pandemic. Everyone's like really like struggling also with their mental health, but at the same time, they are now encouraged to say, in some ways, life is short, so to speak. So how do I want my life to really look? And then they'll turn to their partner and say, we need to work on this. We really need to work on this, or we need to realize that we've been hanging on to something that isn't working. But regardless, we need to look at it.
Yeah.
And that's the silver lining of something that's been very difficult and painful, that's happening. But a lot of times people are now coming in to do just that. And they're doing the work more than they ever have before because they're facing it. So you're absolutely spot on, Annie.
And I think that's wonderful what you do, as in that proactive approach, even those who are moving on from relationships, to be able to do that well, to do that in a very proactive, healthy way. That in itself is just, the best investment, because you're, one, for yourself, you're wanting to get yourself well for, when you move on to another relationship. But two, there's often kids involved. You are going, often you are going to see that person again, and you want to process, well, what's that going to be like? Do you do the drop off kids? Do you talk? Do you not talk? How do you speak about that person in front of your children and creating, because you're responsible for then raising these young, beautiful people and their mindsets and so forth. So I think that is such a wonderful area that you have an incredible opportunity to really invest in, invest in the breakup and move on, if you like. I think that's an area that people devalue, and it's so valuable, and I notice that those people I've coached who've been through those relationships, it's often the aftermath, it's been the trauma in, and then the decision to, and then it's the aftermath that has actually been very, very, very challenging. And that's where they probably could have been helped by seeing someone like you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you've probably, as you're saying, seen this too, but there is something about, right, that aftermath. And if we just brush it under the rug, then again, we continue to repeat, we're not really looking at something that we should. One of the things that, if let's say a couple comes to me to what's called discernment. So discernment counseling is, we don't know whether we're going to make it, or one partner is like, this is like, I'm done. And the other one is, well, let's see if we can save it. What we really say is, we're either going to try and really work on this and make this work and make the investment, or we're going to make the investment of parting with grace and amicability and with some mindfulness and empathy, and then take it from there. And usually what ends up happening is that the couple, like eventually that antagonism or anger, when they've unpacked it all, they can simply look at each other and say, we understand that we've just outgrown this space. Like we're ready, to part. And then usually one of the pair will stay on and work on rebuilding their life, and kind of go through that path. The other thing you said, which I think is very significant, is yes, the co-parenting piece. So if two people can really try and work on it, because that does get complicated.
Yes.
It really does.
Yeah. Very complicated. Oh, I could chat to you all day. You have so much interesting things to say. I will ask you one final question then, just in that therapy piece, because you're doing the couples therapy. What about the people who one person will come and one person won't come, their partner won't come? Is it still valuable to people? I've had people ask me that question, so I thought I'll ask the experts. They're like, well, but we're a couple. What's the point of me going? Is there any point of someone going for themselves? My answer is always yes, because you're needing to work on yourself and the decisions that you'll be making and your growth and even your response in this situation. But I thought I'll ask you, the expert.
Thank you. I agree with you. And I do call that relationship therapy for one, which is you're working on yourself, but you're also working on your relationship with an absent partner. And what that is sort of doing what we would do in couples work, even if that person isn't there. And what I mean by that is looking at particular things, like what are the things that I think triggers the relationship? What would I imagine really is triggering my partner? Learning that perspective, even in your own therapy for one, and then applying it or being more attuned to it. And so often in that work where it's therapy that's supposed to be couples therapy, but really one person, we're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of the partner who's not there.
Yeah.
Let that person apply it. Also, I do believe that if someone is continuing to work on themselves, they show up differently. And that does project onto a relationship. I mean, of course, you have to have someone who's willing and, just we're kind of not looking at, someone who might be a narcissist or things of that nature. But usually what happens is as you're showing up differently, as things boundaries are being set, as you're more attuned to what you might want or need, you're also more inclined to look to that to your partner and make room for that for them and communicate differently. And they do tend to latch onto it. It can happen. And so I highly advocate do it anyway.
Yeah.
Don't let that discourage you from still starting your own work.
Oh, well, I feel greatly encouraged that my advice has been good. And yeah, well done, ladies. I know there's a lot of you and it's very frustrating and it's heartbreaking because you want to be there together and you sort of can easily take it as a message, oh, if they're not going to come, why bother? Because my view is always because you're worth it. You're more than worth it. It's about you, as that's it. People in relationship are two individuals. You're not half a person, and so start using that time to work on you. In fact, you need more at this time if you're struggling, and I think there's so much value in reaching out to an expert who can really help you during this time. So, well, thank you so much for all of your sharing today. How do people find you, Babita?
Oh, thank you, Annie. So they can follow me, on social media, and then, message me there. But email me. My websites are up. If they even just put Babita Spinelli, you'll see my website. I tend to be a real traditionalist, so I really like the old-fashioned phone call. I do. I answer back. I will call back.
Wow, you answer
I
your phone.
do. I do. And, sending an email, right? Babita Spinelli, lp@gmail.com. So those are just some of the ways that they can find me. And I think that I love hearing from people. And even if it's just a little note or a snippet, or if someone has a question, I love to be available to people to do that. That's why I do what I do. I like to be able to help.
Oh, and you certainly do that in spades. So what a blessing you are. Everyone listening, obviously Babita's details will be on my podcast platform and my YouTube channel. And so you'll be able to reach out to her. Thank you so much for all of your sharing. It's been fascinating. It's been a fascinating journey, and you're such an amazing lady. And I'm so glad that you went to your psychotherapist and went, gee, maybe this is for me, and had that moment, because I think, although you were, I'm assuming, an amazing lawyer and still are, this is your space. You can tell you're incredibly personable, giving, kind nature. You can feel it just oozing out of your being, and I'm sure you're such a blessing to so many people. So thank you for sharing on my program today.
Oh, thank you so much, Annie. And same to you. You are such a gift to all of your clients and the work that you do. So I really just feel very grateful to be here and for us to share this space together.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Memoirs of Successful Women. You can find me at anniegibbins.com, where you can download my free resources, get connected on social, and check out my online magic transformation program. If you love this show, feel free to subscribe to future episodes, and of course, share it with your friends. I'll see you again soon, and until then, happy podcasting.